Right, so today was a hugely important day. A hugely important vote was taking place, a motion before the UN Security Council to admit Palestine as a full member, rather than simply having observer status, as it currently does, was to be voted on, which would give the Palestinian Occupied Territories all of the protections every other full member of the UN has. It would also send a powerful message of support for the two-state solution if both of the nations that need to be recognised in that situation have all the same rights and recognitions at the UN as well as each other. Well, in a move that, in my view, now makes the United States entirely complicit in Israel's genocide, in a move that may come to define Joe Biden's administration given the ramifications of this vote, the US have vetoed it, exposing the truth many Zionists have been espousing quite some time, to much of our disgust, those of us opposed to the politics of Zionism and that ideology, that the two-state solution is, in fact, dead. Well, the US just raised their hand and made it so, didn't they? Because if they are so utterly on one side of that equation, and not supportive of both nations, as their veto puts beyond doubt, it truly is dead and buried, and after so many decades of illegal occupation, there's clearly just been an excuse used by all sides supportive of Israel and their illegal occupation to just finish the job of the illegal settlement and annexation of Palestine. Right, so here he is again, and a familiar sight once more, the sight of Robert A. Wood, the US representative on the UN Security Council on this occasion, with his hand in the air, voting down the Palestinian right to full UN membership status. His hand in the air, in my view, killing the two-state solution off entirely. How can he possibly back it? How can the US possibly back it, who he represents, if he can choose one side over the other? That isn't a two-state solution, it is a one-state solution, where Israel just takes everything in the end. To me, this settles matters as far as Genocide Joe goes, because if anyone was thinking there must be a limit somewhere, somehow, as to how far he would go for Israel, no matter what he says or does, the answer is pretty much now a nailed-on no. This was an uncomplicated resolution brought before the UN Security Council. It was so simple. It was so short. In fact, it was one of the shortest draft resolutions brought to the Security Council in their history. And that literally shows anyone voting against it has nowhere to hide on that. The whole of it, the whole thing literally reads, the Security Council, having examined the application of the State of Palestine for admission to the United Nations, S. 2011-592, recommends to the General Assembly that the State of Palestine be admitted to membership in the United Nations. That's it. That's all it was. Just recognise them as full members. But no, the US couldn't have it. And of the 15 Security Council member states, 12 voted for the resolution, 2 abstained, and the US, being permanent Security Council members, vetoed the entire thing by voting against. The 2 abstainers were, to no surprise as usual, the UK, once again, but also Switzerland, as it happens. The whole premise of permanent Security Council members is rooted in the formation of the UN itself, but after so many years, and it giving certain countries some disproportionate and frankly irresponsible levels of power, as keeps getting shown, the UN finds itself paralysed too often, paralysed yet again, by the agendas of certain states. Permanent membership of any council within the UN, but especially on security, needs to be abolished. It's not a fair system. I doubt we'll ever see it happen, though. But this is actually the second time Palestine have tried to gain full member status, as it happens. In 2011, the year before they gained permanent observer status, they attempted full membership then too, but did not manage to secure the minimum number of votes for this to pass. But the minimum requirement was that 9 members of the Security Council had to support their application, and at that time they didn't have those votes. But this time they did, only to get vetoed by the US. 140 countries nationwide already recognise Palestinian statehood. It is an ongoing joke that basically Israeli allies continue to not do this and have now blocked that application once again. A positive vote would have seen the application for full statehood be referred to the full UN General Assembly to be ratified, where with 140 nations recognising them already, the 193-strong General Assembly would have surely passed it and assented to Palestine's elevation to full member status. Instead, they remain observers, able to participate in all proceedings, except when it comes to voting on anything. Hence the word observe, They can watch, but they can't participate and can't take their place as a decision-making state, even as decisions get made about them, as so many other states are, not least Israel, who remain unsanctioned and as arrogant as ever.
I thank the permanent observer of the observer seat of Palestine, for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I wish to begin by thanking the United States, and particularly President Biden, for standing up for truth and morality in the face of hypocrisy and politics. Colleagues, I sat here mere hours ago describing why this resolution is destructive.
The Palestinian representative Riyad Mansour had just finished speaking as that clip began there, before the floor was offered to the Israeli representative to the UN, Gilad Erdan. But you might have noticed some people departing before he began to speak. That was the entirety of the Russian delegation in what pretty much appears to be a show of absolute disgust. But worse was, of course, what came out of Erdogan's mouth afterwards, something Russia was not prepared to stay and listen to. The gushing thanks to Biden and the US for effectively binning the two-state solution and demonstrating beyond all reasonable doubt that here will be no shift from the US as far as its loyalty to Israel goes. Biden was literally thanked for standing against what Israel considers hypocrisy in politics. He really is a little gem of a man, that guy Erdogan, isn't he? Politics is what led to the creation of your state under the auspices of Zionism. That Zionists demanded a Jewish state, but not all Jewish people ever agreed with this. And the UK aided and abetted in no small part to the creation of your now out-of-control rogue nation, arbiters of apartheid and claiming racism against anyone who dares criticise you. It is politics, not religion, that did this. And the UK abstaining, here again now, just damns it all the further. I'm ashamed. By vetoing this now, just reinforcing the decades of warfare and lost lives through all of those wars that have happened because of Israel from 1948 through to Yom Kippur in 1973, the Nakba, of which we appear to be observing a second one, all but in action now. The Torah Jews Twitter account, an anti-Zionist organisation as they are, summed this situation up quite nicely in a recent tweet where they said, "Imagine a group that decides that there's no real thing as being Christian or Muslim. For them, religion and its beliefs are just the common ground to build a new national ideology. They say being Christian is like being American or British. It's not a religion at all, they say. Who would let that fly?" Well, that is exactly what Zionists are doing to the Jewish people. Is this not what Israelis do? Being Jewish and being Israeli conflated between the two. Therefore, anti-Semitism accusations come about not only quite correctly when aimed at Jewish people, but get weaponized when the Israeli state comes in for that criticism too, when they hide behind that excuse, as it becomes, when it's the state being criticized, not a religion. That's the politics of the situation, though, isn't it? The hypocrisy, well, I point you back to the UK, really, but the US have really done a number on this too. In a quote reproduced in the last hour or so at time of writing by Reuters, coming from Mr. Hand in the Air because the US doesn't care, Robert A. Woods, the United States continues to strongly support a two-state solution. This vote does not reflect opposition to Palestinian statehood, but instead is an acknowledgement that it will only come from direct negotiations between the parties. I'd like to call that weasel words, but that'd be an insult to weasels. Palestinian MP Dr. Mustafa Barghouti put it far better in his response tweet to this veto. The American veto against Palestine full membership of the UN means that the talk about two-state solution is merely hypocritical, and is meant to give Israel time to finish illegal settlements and annexation of the occupied Palestinian territories. He's right. Talk of a two-state solution is excuse-making now, when the US won't back that up with action, won't see the two parties as equal. If Robert Woods had let this go to the General Assembly, it would have been up to all member states to ratify this. The US chose to block that from happening. So his talk of Palestinian statehood coming from direct negotiations between parties is a falsehood. All nations are affected. It's what the UN is literally in existence over, to deal with matters like this, to stop them escalating, to stop another world war ever becoming a reality. And if people wondered how two of those came about before, that old adage of good men doing nothing springs to mind here. But good men, all things considered, is a bit of a stretch on this. The US took it upon itself here, via its position on the Security Council, to stop other nations having a say in this matter, some of whom may already recognise Palestine, which they would know from having their say. They now stand in the way of a two-state solution, not supporting it, because they now have decided it can only come about via negotiation with an apartheid genocidal state that they will support come what may, who oppress the Palestinians and continue to do so. Who else are they implying it is in the gift of to grant this? If they won't recognise Palestinian statehood at the UN, they don't recognise it at all. And that puts us all in the much more dangerous path of a one-state solution, where the US and Israel and other hangers-on like the UK will find themselves increasingly isolated over it, deservedly so. This is a day of absolute shame, yet if you'd asked most people yesterday who pay attention to such matters, they would probably have predicted what the US did here. To say the US are getting up more and more nations' noses would be an understatement, as that Russia delegation walkout might have been in no small part to do with, especially since the US the other day did something to wind up Russia, Yemen and Iran all in one go. And if that's got you intrigued, you can get the details of that story on this video recommendation here. I'll hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.